Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. Today I just wanted to talk about the books that I have finished so far this month. So I finished 6 books by the middle of October. I've had a lot more time to read this month, and for that I'm very, very grateful. But I'm also in the middle of some books that I know I'm going to want to talk about longer. So I just feel like it's better if I just film a mid-month wrap up right now, and then for the end of the month I'll have less books to talk about. It'll feel a lot less daunting to film the wrap up. But anyways, this video won't be the most positive of videos because of the 6 books that I finished. Not one of them is an all-time favorite 5-star. And I have mentioned before, I'm not huge on star ratings. I'm kind of veering away from that, but just for the sake of convenience and with Goodreads and everything, I do give them a star rating. So one is definitely like a 2-star book. I have a few middle of the roads, and then one book is like a 4.5-ish star read, and that was a reread as well. So it hasn't been the best reading month so far, but I do think the rest of the month will be very different. I'm in the middle of 4 different books right now, and I'm thoroughly enjoying them. So I feel like the end of month wrap up will be a lot more positive, and I'll have a lot nicer things to say about the books that I finished towards the end of the month as well. Let's just talk about the books that I finished, and I'll talk about them from the lowest to the highest rated. So this first book, I almost DNF'd it, but I did end up just kind of speeding through the rest of it. I got to about the halfway point, and then from there I kind of skim read the rest, which I don't often do. But I was so frustrated with this book. Unfortunately, I'm talking about Miss Eliza's English Kitchen, a novel of Victorian cookery and friendship by Annabelle Abbs. I'm so disappointed. I went in expecting a very cozy book all about Victorian food and friendship, and just a very sweet, innocent story. And before I talk about why I didn't like this book, I'll mention the things that I did like. I really enjoyed how each chapter had a food item listed. So chapter 7, for example, is crab apple jelly. Chapter 6 is a basin of broth thickened with arrowroot. Then we have chapter 4, seasoned gruel. Chapter 3, Oxford punch. I just thought that was a fun touch. I also did like our main characters to an extent. We have Eliza, who is trying to write a cookery book, and she was kind of forced into this because her family is pretty much destitute, and she tried to get some of her poetry published. That didn't go over well, so the publisher is encouraging her to write a cookery book. And at first Eliza is very much not okay with that because she doesn't cook. She never cooked a day in her life. She lived in more affluent circumstances where they had a family cook, and she never had to cook, but she discovers that she does truly have a passion for the culinary arts, and she starts compiling these recipes. And then we also have a teenage girl named Anne who is also destitute, and her family circumstances are awful, so deplorable. And Eliza takes her on kind of as a kitchen maid, and they really discover the beauty of food and the culinary world together and form a friendship along the way. This book had so much potential. The way that it could have explored Eliza and Anne's friendship, the way that it could have explored food, but I grew to really dislike Eliza. I didn't like her. I never understood her motives for anything that she did in this book, and her relationship with Anne was odd. It did not feel like a sweet friendship at all. These characters were not well fleshed out, in my opinion. The writing was fine, it wasn't anything special, but what really bothered me was the unnecessary and absolutely disgusting, very brief but very disgusting moments that were very sexually charged. It was so unnecessary, and I was so grossed out. What I also really don't like is, now I have to say I am not against female independence and being self-sufficient and all of that. I often actually like proto-feminist Victorian novels to an extent, but what I really don't like is when characters are on a mission to be as independent as they possibly can, to be as boss babe as they possibly can, but the cost of that is that they're ruining relationships, burning bridges, and just making terrible decisions that affect not only themselves, but the people that love them. I really don't like that. All right, that's all I'm gonna say about this book. I feel like I'm getting very negative, but I was very disappointed in it, unfortunately. So this I read as a Victorian adjacent novel, as it's set in 1835, it's just a couple years before the Victorian era began. Yeah, an unfortunate, massive dud. I promise I won't be as harsh with the rest of these books. And even though the next few were middle of the road books, I still did enjoy them. So I don't really have strong negative feelings towards them. I just don't have very strong positive feelings towards them. They're very, very middle of the road. So next up is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is the second Emily Wilde book. And the first one I read, I think last year, and I did like it. I think I gave it around 3 stars, and I feel very similarly about this book. There are things about it I liked, things about it that I didn't really care for. So it was a very average read for me. I'm glad I read it. I thought it was really fun, and it's very much a book that I read to experience the atmosphere and the setting and that kind of thing. And it's perfect for the fall season. It is set in September and October, so it was perfect for fall. This series is set in the early 20th century, I believe around 1910-ish, so the late Edwardian era. And it's set in a world that is very much our world, but with the fairy realm also in existence. And so there are like doors to the fairy realm. And we have our main character, Emily, who is a scholar of fairies. And she studies at Cambridge University. And so there's that academia aspect, which I very much enjoyed. And we also have her rival scholar, Wendell, who is my favorite character in the book. They're not so much rivals anymore in this book, but they definitely were in the first one. Emily and Wendell basically have a new adventure that they need to go on. They're trying to figure out how to get to this fairy realm. And the plot felt very similar in pattern and kind of what happened to the first book. So it almost felt like I was reading the first book again, just with a different setting, different side characters, that kind of thing. But it did feel very similar to the first book. I just think me as a reader, I'm very, very picky with fantasy, and I'm getting pickier as the years go by. I like the idea of fairies, but it just doesn't always work for me. I don't know. This book had a very strong start. It starts just as summer is shifting to fall, and so it describes the beautiful seasonal changes, and I love that a lot. And it also starts with some mysterious things going on at Cambridge and a mysterious character. And so I was very, very hooked the first few chapters. But as often happens, when I don't feel a very strong connection to a lead character, I tend to lose interest as the plot progresses. I'm very much a character-driven reader. I could be reading the most exciting plot, but if I don't feel an emotional connection to a character, I don't really care. And I am still learning what I like, what kind of fantasy I like, and I don't know if this is exactly what I like. And I think it's more to do with Emily as a character and the fact that I just think she's very unlikable. She has a pretty bad attitude. She's grumpy a lot of the time. She's just not endearing at all. She did make a lot of the same mistake over and over in this book. It was just irritating, but it wasn't all a negative experience reading this book. The writing was great. The atmosphere was so intense and vivid, and I felt like I was there. It's set in the Swiss Alps in the fall time, and it was just beautifully described. I am a mountain girl at heart, and I love when books are set in mountains. It's my absolute favorite thing in the fall and winter especially. I do love Wendell. If there was a book where he was the main character and everything was from his perspective, I would eat that up. I would love it. He's a great character. And another thing that didn't really work for me is their romance. It's not all that convincing for me. There wasn't much chemistry, but again, that's just my subjective experience. Other people think that their chemistry is amazing. I just didn't feel that way. Also, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say because I'm just rambling at this point, there are a couple side characters. We have Ferris Rose, I think was his name, and Ariadne, who is Emily's niece. And they were just there. They were there for the ride. They went on this adventure with Emily and Wendell, but they didn't really contribute much to the story and to the plot. And I was expecting Ariadne actually to have a bigger role in the story. And I don't know, there was just so much potential that wasn't realized. And so this book is very middle of the road. I liked it. I'm glad I read it, but I don't think it's a series where I want to continue. I know there's a third book that's either out or coming out. I don't think I'm going to read it, and I don't know if she's going to continue. I don't think I'm going to continue the series, but I think the author has so much potential to write an amazing fantasy novel. I just don't think this specific type and this series is for me. Alrighty, so this next one is the October group read, and that is The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This was another book where I liked things, I didn't like things. It's middle of the road. I didn't feel very strongly about it either way. I don't think you should know too much going into this book other than we have a girl named Isabel who feels very trapped in her middle-class life, in her marriage, and she meets this young man named Roland who captures her interest, and she becomes even more embittered with the fact that she is stuck in this marriage. And I don't think you should know much else. She is married to a doctor. I mean, The Doctor's Wife, it's the title. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. And it's one of those books where I'm like, I finished it and I was a little confused with my thoughts. And I'm like, let me read the introduction. I feel like if I do, I'll gain a better appreciation for the story, for Isabel, maybe even, you know, maybe it'll garner some sympathy for her that I did not feel towards her. And unfortunately, it did not. This was not as sensational as I was expecting. Lady Audley's Secret, I feel, is a much more fun book than this one was, for me at least. Isabel was a very, very unique character. Not likable at all, but very unique. I do understand why she was the way she was. This novel deals a lot with her emotional immaturity and then her emotional maturity developing and that kind of thing. She was very much influenced by her environment. She did not have a good home life and she didn't really have any role models in her life besides her books. Her books were what molded her into the character that she was, and her love of books was very endearing, I will say that. And there are so many references to so many different books that I've never even heard about. And the big thing though is this book really spoils Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens, which thankfully I have read that, and that's like my favorite Dickens novel so far. And so every time Dombey and Son was referenced, I did like that and I understood the reference. So looking at Isabel as a person, you can understand why she is the way she is and why she thinks the way that she thinks and has certain expectations of her life. But it was just irritating. I was irritated with her so much. We do have a side character named Sigismund Smith, who is a sensation novelist, and I loved that man so much. I wish we got more of him. He was very present in the first several chapters and then kind of dropped from the story and then came again, but I don't know. I wish there was more of him. He was my favorite character for sure. And then Gilbert, who is the doctor that Isabel marries, I just felt he was flat. I did not feel he was a very complex character. I don't know. I didn't really care for him at all. My thoughts are so disorganized with this book. I don't even know what to say next. I will say though, Mary Elizabeth Braddon, she tackles certain topics in a very nuanced way, and she's not preachy at all with the topics that she explores in her books, and so I really like that. It was a very easy classic to get into, very accessible and balanced writing. But yeah, I liked the writing, I liked the reading experience for the most part, but I did not like Isabel, and yeah, I was just annoyed a lot of the time, but I liked it. Very mixed feelings. I don't know. It's definitely not going down as a favorite Victorian novel, but I'm glad that I read it and I probably would reread it in the future. I don't know what else to say about this book, but that is The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, the Victober group read. All right, I have 3 more books to talk about. I'll try not to be as long-winded with the rest, but this next one is The Sinister Mystery of the Mesmerizing Girl by Theodora Goss, another Victober adjacent book as it is set in the late Victorian era, and it's kind of a sort of sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction. A very fun book. It's the 3rd book in the, I forget the series name, the Athena Club series. This one was quite fun. It deals more with Egyptian mythology, which I thought was really fun. I always like ancient Egypt, that kind of thing. So it was a fun element to the story. And although it is the 3rd book in the series, each book has its own plot line. Definitely recommend reading them in order though. But in this book, we have our main girls. So we have Mary Jekyll, Diana Hyde. I'm sure you recognize their last names if you've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They are the daughters of the 2 men. We have Justine Frankenstein, we have Catherine Moreau, we have Beatrice Rappaccini, we have Lucinda Van Helsing, and we do see some very fun literary characters in this one, including Oscar Wilde, and we have Sherlock and Watson. It's just such a fun book for lovers of those classics, this whole series, I would say. The first book is definitely my favorite in the series. It feels the most Victorian. This one felt a lot more leaning towards the fantasy mythology, which is fine, but I definitely prefer the first book and how it felt very much almost Dickensian in a way. One of the girls in this group is kidnapped in this book, and there is also this plot to take the throne from Queen Victoria. And so the rest of the girls are on this mission to save their friend. Sherlock Holmes has also disappeared, and so the girls and Watson are trying to find him. And it's one of those stories where these separate things going on are part of a bigger plot. It also has to do with Egyptian mythology, like I mentioned, and it's very fun. It's not a favorite book. I would say this is probably like a 3.75, almost a 4-star read. I did very much enjoy it. What I really, really like about this series is the friendship. It is so prominent in the stories. It's really the highlight of the stories is the girls' friendships with each other. And I also just love that Sherlock and Watson are characters. And I feel like this author really did these characters justice. And you could tell that she loves these classic Gothic stories so much. And it's just so fun. And I'm so glad I completed this series. I do think it's one I would return to in the future. And yeah, that is the Sinister Mystery of the Mesmerizing Girl. Next up, we have In the Shadow of a Queen by Heather B. Moore. And this one I really, really enjoyed. It is about Louise. She is one of Queen Victoria's daughters. Definitely one of her daughters that people don't talk about as much. And she was such a fascinating character. This book really is about her life and how her life was upended when her father, Prince Albert, died. And it's just Louise's story, really, from childhood to adulthood, how she involves herself in different social justice movements, the suffragettes she really gets into, and it also shows how she really discovered her talent for sculpting and art. I actually knew next to nothing about Louise going into this book. I definitely heard more about Victoria and Alice and Beatrice, but Louise not so much. Same with Helena. But I'm so fascinated by Queen Victoria and her family, and I just want to know more. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the research was super well done, and it definitely caused me to go down a rabbit hole of researching Louise and her life and her marriage. The one thing I will say is, and I've definitely seen other people say something similar, where the relationship between Louise and the man she ends up marrying, it felt a lot more romanticized in this book, and I get it. It's a fictionalized story of her life. It's a novel. It's going to romanticize things, but it didn't feel very accurate to how her marriage actually was. But again, I'm just going off of the few things that I read online as well and what I learned about her marriage. So it's not all that important. It was well written, I would say. It's a little bit on the dry side. I feel a lot of the characters felt very two-dimensional, and it's very much like a he said this and she said that. But I liked the dialogue, and I loved especially when Louise was younger. And at the beginning of each chapter, we have letters that were written from characters to Louise, like from Albert to Louise before he died, from Louise to her siblings. And then some chapters also have excerpts from Queen Victoria's own diaries, which was really interesting as well. Just as an example, the little intro to chapter 4. Queen Victoria's Journal, December 24th, 1856. Albert arranged a surprise for the children. In Germany, the old saying that St. Nicholas appears with a rod for naughty children and gingerbread for good ones is constantly represented. And Arthur, one of her sons, hearing of this, begged for one. Accordingly, Albert got up a St. Nicholas. Most formidable he looked, in black, covered with snow, a long white beard, a red nose, of a gigantic stature. He came in asking the children, who were somewhat awed and alarmed, "Are you a good child?" and giving them gingerbread and apples. Another excerpt, it's a letter from Louise to her brother Arthur, and she was around 13 at this time. My dearest Arthur, I miss you so much. I'm so glad that you arrived safely in London. I have bought you a beautiful squirting ball. I hope you will like it. We took our general Sunday walk by the Dee, and we were nearly blown into it. Leopold and I are going to play with your fair. Mr. Leach said that he misses you very much. I'm going to paint you some pictures for your book, and I will give them to you at Windsor. Baby speaks nearly all day of you. I will soon write to you again, and a longer letter too. Those little touches just felt very personal, and I love that. I love reading people's letters, and especially people in the Victorian era. I don't know what it is about it, but I love it so much. I just think Louise is such a fascinating character. She was very headstrong, basically a proto-feminist. She's very independent. She wanted to help Victoria as much as she could. Obviously, she wanted to support her mother as queen as much as she could, but there was always that, I don't know if rebellion is the right word, but that feeling of wanting to break free of all this, protocols that come with being a royal family member, especially a daughter of the queen. And what's so sad is how Queen Victoria's mourning so affected her relationship with her children. It affected everyone. It affected the country as a whole. It affected her entire kingdom. But it's so tragic. I feel like the younger children of Victoria and Albert, definitely part of their childhood was robbed of them when Albert died. And this book really deals with that and deals with their grief, and it was very emotionally engaging in that sense. It's not an all-time favorite book. As I mentioned, the writing was a little on the dry side, but I did like it. I thought the author did a great job with her research, and I do hope she writes more stories in this kind of vein. I really, really enjoyed it. And the last book that I want to talk about is my favorite out of these 6 for sure, and that is A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I did not read The Sign of the Four. I just read A Study in Scarlet. It was a reread for me. I'm going to be slowly making my way through the whole canon again. I have completed it, and I'm very, very excited to get back into it. So I read A Study in Scarlet, and I so enjoyed it. I loved going back and getting to see how Sherlock and Watson met for the first time, and how different these two men are, but how their friendship began, and it's just so cozy. They both move into 221B Baker Street as flatmates basically, and Watson is very taken aback when he learns what Sherlock does for a living, which is basically solving mysteries, and they're just such an eccentric duo. I love it so much. And in this one, we have a murder that occurs, a body is discovered, and there isn't any apparent cause of death right off the bat. And so Sherlock is obviously helping the police with the mystery. We meet Inspector Lestrade, which is a really, really fun side character. And with this murder that occurs, there is a word written in blood on the wall, and it says, I think it's Rache, R-A-C-H-E. And so they're trying to figure out what on earth is going on with that. And then we jump to America several years before, and we have a group of Mormons that are traveling through America in Utah, and they stumble across a man who is basically starving to death and a young girl who is with him. And I'm not going to say anything else about that, but as different as these two things sound, the two stories come together and it's just so fun. I will say though, the first time I read this book, I gave it 5 stars. This time around, it's more of a 4-star read. I so enjoyed it. The first half set in London, 5 stars. But when we move to America, it's just so jolting and sudden, and it just feels so different in tone. And I'm not sure I really like that. And I don't really like the backstory of the murder and those involved and all of that. I'm not the biggest fan, but all in all, it was such a fun reread. I love Sherlock. I love Watson. I want to live in 221B Baker Street. I would love to do some amateur sleuthing with Sherlock, but that is a study in Scarlet. So friends, those are the 6 books that I have completed so far this month, and I was going to mention at the beginning of the video the books that I'm in the middle of, completely forgot to do that, but I'm making my way through Abbey Church by Charlotte Mary Young. I am so behind with this. The people I was buddy reading with, they're all done, and I'm just, you know, halfway through the book. I'm blaming it on my surgery because that just threw me off. It threw my reading off, and anyways, so I'm still reading Abbey Church, very much enjoying it. It feels very Jane Austen-esque and just so cozy and domestic. I love it. I'm also reading Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins and really, really enjoying that one. And then I'm reading How to Be a Victorian very, very slowly. I don't think I'll finish it this month. I'll probably finish it in November for nonfiction November, if that's still happening. But How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman, I'm so enjoying that one. And then I'm also reading Sylvia's Lovers by one of my favorite authors of all time, Elizabeth Gaskell, and I'm loving it so much. So I do think by the end of the month, I will, you know, have read a lot of new all-time favorite books. That is my hope. And I hope that October has been a great reading month for you so far. Please do let me know what the highlight of the month is for you, or if you're kind of like me where you've been enjoying your reads, but nothing outstanding so far. But I'd love to know in the comments below. Thank you so, so much for watching this video, friends, and I will see you in my next Victober video. Bye.